According to one poll, 1 out of every 10 men who attend church regularly are dealing with sexual addiction. In 2003, those pastors who admitted it amounted to 37% who struggle with online pornography. Net surfers could spend up to $3 billion in adult internet sites, and 87% of those who have been convicted of molesting young girls are regular users of hardcore pornography.
We've corrupted a whole generation through the sexual aspect. Not everybody within those generations, but large portions of the generations have become addicted to sexual stimulation, have lost their interest in forming lasting relationships with members of the opposite sex and forming families, and families are the basic building block of society. So you have a horrible situation where a lot of young boys and even girls within college and within schools have become so wrapped up in themselves and so myopic that they've become addicted to the sexual stimuli that flows over the internet on a daily basis.
Today, America's children are literally being bombarded with images of violence and sex and nudity and gangs and all the rest. It is literally out of control.
There's a long history of copycat crimes that have been inspired by film and by television and even by print. But certainly in the film industry, one of the most horrible examples is in England. There were 2 boys who took a little child out, a young child, tied him to a railroad tracks and copied a scene out of Child's Play 3, the 3rd episode. And the judge was so horrified by how they copied it down to the slightest detail of painting the boy blue and slashing him and just vivisecting him.
Come on! Okay, sport. We're gonna have a little game of Chucky Says.
One boy, when he slashed up his girlfriend, and they called the police, and the police opened the door, said he was just copying a movie that he had seen.
A young person sees not only violence in the movies as a way to solve the big problems in the world, but then he or she is treated to nonstop news coverage of school shootings and other acts of violence. I mean, we bring it all to you live nowadays in living color, and so before long, there is just a desensitizing that goes on, and picking up a gun and shooting up your school seems rather commonplace.
There's a number of people out there that don't like what they see, that have a terrible time every time a movie comes out that their kids want to see, of having to keep their kids from going to see it because all their friends want to see it. It's very hard to take a stand for values.
The church for many years was the birthplace not just of movies but of great culture. You have Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, and of course Handel and his beautiful Messiah. All of that grew out of the church. And today we've abandoned it. There's been a constant erosion of that over the last 100 years, starting probably in the mid-1800s.
They did a recent survey at a junior high school, and they asked them who Jesus was. And the responses were, oh, it's some guy's name that you say when you slam your finger in your locker. Or there was one kid that said, oh, he was some dude that lived back when George Washington was around. And so there really isn't an understanding of the basics of who Jesus is, what the Bible stands for, what values that Christians hold.
In 1950, 70% of the kids were fully aware of the Bible, could quote to you the 10 Commandments, thou shouldn't steal, you shouldn't commit adultery, etc. Now, only 4% of the children could do that.
There's other polls that have come out indicating that there's a huge number of Christians in our country. I think the success of Mel Gibson's film shows that there's a lot of people that wanted to see this film and that support those values.
But what exactly are the biblical values that Christians support today? And do Christians really walk and think with a biblical worldview? According to a George Barna poll in 2003, everyone has a worldview, but even among devoutly religious people, relatively few have a biblical worldview. That is, a belief that absolute moral truth exists as defined by the Bible, that Jesus Christ lived a sinless life, that God is the all-powerful and all-knowing creator of the universe, that he still rules the universe today, that salvation is a gift from God and cannot be earned, that Satan is real, that a Christian has a responsibility to share their faith in Jesus Christ with other people, and that the Bible is accurate in all its teaching. Surprisingly, according to the Barna poll, only 9% of those claiming to be born-again Christians have a biblical perspective on life. We find ourselves in a post-Christian culture today. Paganism, among other religious philosophies, is mainstream, and the church has adopted many of these anti-biblical values. It is a spiritual predicament the Apostle Paul warned his traveling companion Timothy about in the Bible 2,000 years ago.
It's clear that Paul wrote to Timothy about a great apostasy that was going to come. He said that the Spirit speaks expressly that some shall depart from the faith. There'll be a great falling away. And it's important for the Christian to remember that this falling away just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It actually happens within a cultural milieu in which we find ourselves. And the milieu that we find ourselves in today is a mass media culture. It is a culture that accentuates entertainment. It's a culture that is decadent. And it's a culture that offers many ideas that are contrary to sound doctrine found in the Bible.
Joe Holden teaches theology and apologetics at Calvary Bible College in Marietta, California, and says in order to be protected against the imminent apostasy taking place today, Christians must be equipped to defend their faith with the learning of biblical apologetics.
Apologetics is simply a defense of the Christian faith. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to defend. So for the Christian, apologetics is to defend against an attack against the doctrine of God or against His existence, perhaps the nature of Christ. Truth being absolute, we want to defend against attacks against truth, and even the resurrection of Christ from the dead. All these things are main tenets of apologetics, and as of late they have all been come under attack.
Shunned by the major studios' distribution network, Mel Gibson's marketing strategy included working directly with churches across America and free television exposure like Diane Sawyer's Primetime and Good Morning America.
You said at one point that a big dark force didn't want us to make this film.
Sure.
What was the force?
What was the force? It's the thing you can't see. See, I'm a believer, by the way. So if you believe that there are big realms of good and evil, and they're slugging it out.
What does the evil side want?
Oh, it wants you. It wants you. People are capable of horrors, of atrocities. We're also capable of wonderful things, of good things. And we have the choice. What do we choose, you know?
One of the things that I was very impressed by with working with Mel Gibson on the set in Italy was the fact that he really understood spiritual warfare. He really had a complete understanding of why we're here and how important people are in this whole spiritual battle between good and evil that's taking place. That the dark forces that are in this world are able to influence people without them knowing it. And that people must be very, very important to God. That the fact that there would even be this battle over them. And he was able to understand that I don't think people really realize just how important they are and the roles that each of us have in this world and the influence that we have.
It's attractive, yet it's intimidating. Masculine, yet feminine. For me, I think evil is something that when it comes to you, it's not necessarily going to come with a sign saying, I'm evil. It usually will come in an enticing form.
There was a scene that was shot for the movie that was edited out that showed Satan leaning in to the Roman soldier that was in charge of the scourging of Jesus, and just leaning in and whispering into his ear that that they needed to crank up the whipping that they were giving Jesus and make it even more brutal. And the look on the soldier's face when Satan leaned in was totally blank. He didn't know that he was getting this message from Satan. And at that point, he then gives the order to continue the beating only on a more destructive level against Jesus. And I thought it was an interesting scene because it showed that while the soldier probably thought that it was his idea to do this, it really wasn't. It was a thought that was being whispered into his ear by Satan, and I think that it showed that if that's going on in this world, there's a lot of people that are getting ideas to do certain things that aren't really their ideas. They think that they are, but they're actually from demonic forces that are influencing them.
We can look at the power of ideas throughout history and see that the power of Hitler's idea and what his concept of a perfect state would be in world domination led to 25 million deaths. I'm told that every word in his Mein Kampf led to 125 deaths.
With the advent of incredible special effects, the power of ideas had been given new dimensions into almost dangerous spiritual realms. What was once relegated to internal concepts of imagination are now virtual reality and available to all on the silver screen. Fantasy, myth, and the use of imagination as propagated in the Harry Potter phenomenon takes the power of the occult to new levels. How do we as Christians measure our participation in the fantasy genre, and are there any spiritual dangers?
There are dangers in the power of myth, fantasies, and imagination. Undoubtedly, there is content within these myths that are inimical to the Christian faith. And that's what we want to be careful on by comparing it to the Scriptures. Paul warned the Colossian church in chapter 2 that they are to beware of philosophy. They're to beware of anybody who would seek to cheat them according to the basic principles of the world and not according to Christ. Now, Paul wasn't removing all philosophy from the Colossian church. We know that because he clarifies what kind of philosophy he was talking about. It was that kind of philosophy that followed according to the traditions of men and according to the basic principles of the world and not according to Christ. But so also with myth, we have oftentimes philosophies being couched within these storylines and in the imagination that could yield harmful spiritual results to somebody, especially the mind who is young, who's immature, and I'm talking about children at this point, because there is that power.
Christian authors such as Tolkien, famous for his Lord of the Rings trilogy, and C.S. Lewis's contemporary and creator of the Narnia tales, have inspired much modern-day controversy and commentary for their use of myth, fantasy, and amalgamation with pagan ideas. Their literature draws adherents from such wildly divergent religious views, from neo-pagans to evangelical Christians. So how do concerned Christians evaluate the messages in the storytelling of those calling themselves Christians?
We should be equally alert and discerning in our evaluation of the content of myth, even though the writer or the screenplay is done by a Christian. Paul told the Thessalonian church to test all things. And that doesn't stop just with spiritual things, it stops with everything. We should always have a mind that can discern and be evaluative and come to proper conclusions, especially those conclusions as they line up with Scripture.